Welcome to the next episode. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Ford. And what I've been thinking about inside of EchelonOrchid today is how can we improve our overall performance mentally, physically, spiritually, and align with our business world, our personal lives, and just really connect with whatever our life journey is going to be. I know for myself, I've been really thinking about this quite a bit. Hopefully, my guest, and I'm pretty sure my guest is absolutely going to help each of you, and well as myself, figure out where we are along this journey. He is the founder of Essentialise. He has an undergrad in international business psychology, a master's degree in environmental psychology, and what I would consider a lifelong learner in just the overall well-being of ourselves and those that are around us. He's certified in stress management and performance, nutrition, strength and conditioning. It's all over, but it's all centered around this full, what I like to say, circle of well being. So, please welcome my guest, Lee Chambers. Lee, thank you so much for joining me on EchelonOrchid.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Daniel, for having me on today.
Absolutely. So Lee, I guess one of the things that was very interesting to me, and I've read several of the articles that you've been in, and most people, they all seem to ask you, what is an environmental psychologist? It's not something that we hear quite a bit about.
Yeah, it's interesting because while it's relatively new and was started to be defined around 50 years ago, to put it into nice, digestible, understandable perspective for people, it really covers three particular areas. So the first area where I am mainly prevalent and is my specialization is around looking at the psychological stress and the psychological impact of urban human created environments on well-being and performance. So in that aspect, we are working with city planners, transport designers, people who build offices, architects, designer of homes, and designers of commercial buildings, and looking how those design elements can be created, adjusted, and built to ensure that humans are able to perform at a high level within them and that the well-being is regenerated by them. There's also two other sections. The second section is looking at humans' interaction with nature, how nature affects thoughts, feelings, behaviours, and how that's reciprocal. So people who spend more time in nature, their interactions change, and identifying why that is and seeing how that can be utilised to increase human health, to increase human understanding. And the third aspect that my contemporaries work on is the most interesting to some people indeed, is looking at environmental behaviour. So why do we have such a range of behaviours? How do values, social norms, group theory, policies and principles affect people's environmental behaviours on a number of different levels? Why do some people litter? Why do some people believe climate change doesn't exist? Why do some people believe that natural disasters are God's way of saying you're not doing a good job? And it's like looking at a whole very wide spectrum of environmental issues and trying to define how people's behaviours can be changed, can be impulsively looked at, how can they be influenced, and how can they be shaped to help them make more sustainable decisions and look at the environment as something that they possess the control to make a difference to.
I think it's fascinating to me, and I would say one of the articles that I read that you were quoted in, and I love this quote because I think as a technologist it resonates with me greatly. And you had said essentially that you wanted to be a disruptor into the well-being industry. I don't know if I quoted it exactly right, but I think that you want to change, I guess, the way people think about this wellness industry. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it's disruptive from a number of angles. So the wellness and well-being industry, it's not full of young black men like me. I don't come across in that traditional, well-being aspect. I'm a little bit different, and I come at it from my own personal experience, which includes working inside organizations, taking elements from elite sport, taking elements from my different qualifications that I've done over the years, and kind of blending that into something different. But I feel that naturally, from a business perspective, wellness providers, there's lots of them out there. Many of them have strong technical skills in their areas. Many of them are heart-centered and really want to make a difference to people's worlds, to people's health. And they tend to bring their technical skills into business, into community, and really work on today's well-being challenges that have really manifested themselves due to the last 10 years and how the world has become. And for me, I understand that and see today's challenges and understand that they need to be, in some ways, looked at now and tried to be mitigated. Because in a time of crisis, action needs to be taken. And yet, I suppose I come from a different sense in that I actually look across the spectrum in an integrated way, that today's wellbeing challenges, it's great that they are actioned and attempted to be tackled, and yet they are principally the root of the past. So I'm looking and thinking, I need to look at all the areas, and I do a lot of well-being in work. Work has its own unique set of challenges, and well-being at work at the moment is an exercise in, we have a budget, we need to find a provider, bring them in, health awareness, yoga classes, fruit bowls. Maybe we'll build a slide in the middle of the office so everyone can have fun at work. And yet, on a simple basis, people don't get well-being externally. Well-being comes internally to them. And well-being also starts in organizations from an internal perspective. On a base level, the fundamentals of your employees feeling that initial well-being surge is them being appreciated for the work that they do, and for them having some level of autonomy in their role to develop as they go through and work every day. So when I'm looking at well-being, I'm not looking at bringing well-being into the business. I'm looking at well-being starts internally. How can we change your workplace culture? How can we increase the consciousness of leadership? How can we introduce more emotional intelligence into management? How can we be more defined in the purpose of the business so that the values can become congruent? Those values are lived, they're used to make decisions. Stakeholders across the board are considered: society, customers and clients, employees, investors, partners and collaborators. And through that lens, employees can then see that the business is making a difference in the world. That is something that I can be part of. That aligns to my journey. Therefore, I am engaged. I have motive to come to work. I have a reason to, in so many ways, come and make a difference myself. And when I'm engaged, and when I'm regenerating myself by doing something that's worthwhile, my own health behaviours become a priority to me. That influences my health behaviour. I want to start to experiment to see how I can become healthier, how I can perform at a high level, how I can get more time and energy to do the things that I like. So we take that principle, starts inside, and then we look to the future. Tackling today's problems is great, but if you want to prevent tomorrow's issues, tomorrow's challenges, you need to future cast. Start to work your way back. Start to look, what are the future well-being challenges of the future of work? How can we start to look at those? We can't predict them with 100% accuracy. We can start to see how levels of automation, levels of biotechnology, off-balance sheet working, different methodologies that will come and be prevalent. What challenges will they bring? How can we start to prevent those today? By doing that, when we face those obstacles, when we face those challenges, we will be more equipped to deal with them. There is no doubt that as we move through the technological revolution towards Society 5.0 and towards a different way of looking at things, that automation will bring capacity to look at well-being in different aspects that can be taken and used really powerfully to ensure that people suddenly can be empowered, can be encouraged, and have the emotional flexibility, the cognitive capacity, and the fostered creativity to be a part of that future of work, to actually bring more, to become more as humans, both in performance terms and well-being terms. And in so many ways, that's really why I'm passionate about what I do, because I've been through my own well-being challenges. They've coloured my own lens, and yet I am incredibly passionate about well-being starting within organisations and being something that can be invested in to ensure the future is smoother and that people have the resilience and are prepared.
You hit on so many things that just resonate with me. And I'm reminded right now of, as I'm in New York and my organization was going through the shutdown due to COVID. And what I started to tell my people, because many of them had never had to work remotely before, how to set their routine. But I was really concerned that now all of a sudden they were going to be sitting in front of a monitor all day long. They were not going to get any exercise, and they weren't going to get hydrated enough. They're not going to get the nutrition. And we tend to, when we get in those stressful moments, at least I tended to gravitate towards things that were horrible for me. When I worked for XM Radio and I had to work a lot of overnights because we were building something brand new, I would gravitate towards potato chips and Cheetos and soda and coffee, and I felt horrible. And I went to my martial arts instructor and I'm like, hey, why do I feel so bad? And he's like, well, hey, everything your body needs, you're doing the exact opposite. You're getting a little short-term boost and you're hurting yourself long-term. And so I told my employees about that store and I said, look, I want you, drinking X amount of water, get up, drink a glass of water. Make sure you're taking enough multivitamins, things of this nature. You're taking this, you're doing this. Don't eat the garbage. Eat, nuts, eat, fruits and vegetables. And I kept having to say, drink more water. And I said, I keep asking you to drink more water. It's not where you'll get up and have to go to the bathroom, because you need to exercise a little bit and take a break from your screen. And that is when I started going, okay, there's got to be more to this, because now we're disconnecting the culture. And how can I continue to connect with them? But how can I make sure that they don't suffer not just a health event today, but also the future? Because I want them to hopefully have good habits coming out of this. So this way, if they have good habits, they won't get sick even later. Because if they're sick, then they can't work. And I want them to work, but I want them to feel good. What other kind of advice would you have for people that have had to all of a sudden go work from home, and how to stay connected, and the companies that are looking to help that evolve that culture, nutrition? All this kind of plays into with one another.
Yeah, and
was my advice decent?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely, because again, it's small changes. Having people drink a little bit more water, it's actionable, it's easy. People feel like they can do it. So again, for me, a lot of the work I do around well-being within work, I bring in that initial foundation, but then we actually move to, physiologically and psychologically looking at how we can improve ourselves. And in so many ways, we start to look at nutrition, at sleep, at movement, at mindset, and at habits. And for a lot of people now working from home, it's really important. The first thing is really important to understand that you are, in so many ways, doing great given the situation. So before COVID, people who were moving to remote working, they had a nice 6-month running. You had technological setup, you had training, you had a acclimatization period, you had, let's ensure that you get the full support all the way through the move from the office. And they would stage it, stagger it, to start on one day, gradually work yourself in. And for millions of people across the world, you're resilient enough to go from office to work and office to home in about a week. So firstly, you have to actually celebrate the fact that you've got through that process, because that is way beyond the typical, and you've made it. So having that first kind of understanding that it's not easy and you've achieved it, but then we can start to look and think, we've achieved it, how much more can we get out of this experience? So I build my clients and help them schedule. Scheduling is vital when you're working from home, because again, those boundaries of the workplace are not there. You're psychologically not in that workplace environment. So what I actually suggest, and it does differ depending on client, but a lot of the common themes are get yourself dressed in something that you relate to being workwear. So for some people, that's very, very smart. For some people, that's a little bit more casual. But what you put on for the office, put on at home. What it is ultimately, in cloth cognition, you will work more productively if you're in something, wearing something that you feel is workwear, because you identify with that. And it's a well-proven concept, which is why as soon as someone puts a uniform on, they feel ready for role. They're just there. That's what they do. So by doing that, you're starting to prime yourself to go to work. Another big tip that I use is a lot of people suddenly working from home, you lose your commute. So you'll lose the transition between home and work. So find a way to simulate that. I quite often suggest leave your home, lock the door, walk around the block, open your door, enter work. Suddenly you're psychologically shifted from leaving home, walking, which in its own way gets you cognitively going, blood pumping, and gets you that little bit more focused. You've got those full sensory effects of the wind hitting your face, the smell of the outdoors, looks from the light of the sun going into your eyes. So you get that sensory shift. You then return, unlock that door, and walk into work. And again, you're shifting the psychological frame and state. Then, with your working day, ensure you're scheduled. So try to set up your working from home station in a place that feels like you can work there effectively. Try to avoid the highest traffic place in your house, or you'll continually get distracted. Try to partition this place off so it feels like work and it's disconnected. Try to remove lots of other environmental distractors. If you've got the pile of washing there, if you've got children's toys in your eye line when you're working, these will effectively take your attention away and put an element of attention residue as you think, oh, they decided that up, and it knocks you out of your workflow. And it's important to try and get into that flow state while we're working, because that's how we do deep, effective work. We also need to ensure that we time block our day so that we have the breaks that we need to rest and recover, to disconnect from work so we can reconnect stronger. Our cells, 98% of them run on ultradian rhythms, which run from about 60 to 90 minutes, which is why we find we can only concentrate effectively and work on complex tasks for so long. It's important to honor those in so many ways. When we don't honor those, we find ourselves becoming less productive, less effective, and start to run ourselves towards burnout. So it's vital that we work in those time blocks, 60 to 90 minutes, and then take 10 to 15 minutes to disconnect from inputs, from stimulus, and just move yourself out of work so you can reconnect again. In so many ways, it's like working in waves, and our brains work in waves. And if you look at anything, our heartbeats worked in a wave. Our whole life, seasons, our whole world works in waves. And it's important for you to be able to oscillate on and off. It's even more vital when you're working from home, because that allows you to switch off at the end of the day. It also allows you to switch off in the evening when you need to go to sleep. And finally, utilize those blocks and make sure you have some form of dinner hour to get outside, to move, to get out into the fresh air, to get out into the light. Use it to cook. Use it to connect with people intentionally. Don't just rush. This again has given us the chance to maybe slow down a little bit and just connect intentionally with other people. And be aware that through remote working, suddenly connection is different. You can't see your colleague. You can't see that they're flustered or they're upset. So you may get a communication through by message, by Slack channel, by email, and you can be easily triggered by the wording, what you feel is being inferred. And yet, if we just take a little step back with compassion and empathy and realize that sometimes they might just be struggling, might just need a kind word, because not an easy time. There's an underlying level of anxiety with everybody, because out there is a particular virus that can possibly end your life. And it's not, as many would say, a typical scenario that our generation and other generations are used to. And yet, human beings in crisis are incredibly resilient. In fact, crisis creates innovation, creativity, and in so many ways, that disruption of the status quo as we look to utilize the challenge to grow, to become more, to step into the unknown and the uncertain and start to build something for the future.
I agree wholeheartedly, and this aspect with this virus has had maybe even think again even more so, because people can debate, I guess, to whatever way they want to with science as to whether or not COVID-19 is as deadly as they thought. I go, hey, I think we use the data science models and machine learning to help us make a decision as to why we needed a social distance, we needed a mask, we needed a quarantine, and they want to go, the data models are wrong. I'm going, well, no, because they're probably not, because we did regression algorithm. This is what led us to this part. And I just go, regardless, and you had hit on something earlier, looking at that future aspect, there's probably going to be another type of coronavirus that comes out. I mean, looking at the history, there was SARS, there's MERS, now there's SARS-2 slash COVID. And I wanted to be able to provide a countermeasure, which I would believe is, how do I get myself, my immune system pumping on the way it needs to be, and living a healthy lifestyle, because I want to be able to mentally and physically, be able to defeat whatever that next virus might be in the lapse of some type of scientific antidote. And that's where you kind of hit on all those things, at least to me, as to, this is why when I'm thinking about code, I was finishing up my MBA, I'm like, how am I going to I want to live to be, well, infinitely if I could. But if I'm going to make it to 80, to 90, to 100 and live a good lifestyle, I've got to start changing some habits. And, some things you're saying resonate directly. Your story kind of resonates. And I'm curious, because, part of how you got to where you are is you actually did have to live your own words. You were at least incapacitated for a period of time. Tell some people a little bit about that, and how this lifestyle. I mean, for you had to live it. If you didn't live it, you might still not be able to walk.
Yeah, exactly. And in so many ways, it was eye-opening for me learning the science when I was younger. And yet there's nothing like having to apply it on yourself when times are challenging. And yeah, it's So, I mean, I was 29 and I had just got married. My son was 18 months old and my wife was 6 months pregnant with our daughter. And I was in a good place. I was working in elite sport. I was running my video game business. And life was, to society, looked like everything was great. And yet, over the course of 5 days, my immune system attacked the connective tissue in my joints and left me in a hospital bed, unable to walk, unable to show myself, unable to eat properly. And again, it was incredibly shocking because I was in a lot of pain and it had just happened. I was completely wiped out. And in so many ways, I was then thinking, whoa, okay, so I have no idea what's just happened. But I've just gone from being fit, healthy, playing team sports, doing whatever I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, to being effectively like a baby again. And I was like, wow, not sure how to process this. So initially, I was in shock. It just hit so quickly and so acutely. Didn't know what had happened. And then it kind of transitioned into despair and frustration. So I've been through challenges in my life before. I had mental health challenges at university. I suffered redundancy in the economic crash in 2008. So in many ways, it wasn't the first challenge that I'd had, but it was the first significant, life-changing event. And what I knew I needed to do was let the negative emotions come and experience those, because in so many ways we have the whole spectrum of emotions as human beings, from blazing joy to deepest, darkest despair, for a reason. Got to feel and process them all. So I went through that despair and that frustration. I'm 29. I'm young. I've looked after myself. Like, I exercise. I eat well. Like, why me? And that started to pass. And then I moved through to grief. So as a young male, I was like, my mobility, my physicality. I'm athletic. I put quite a lot of value on being able to run around and do what I do and play with my children. And suddenly, I don't know what the future holds. And I kind of had to process through that and got to the second week and still stuck in a hospital bed, still having an awful lot of time to reflect, as you do when you can't move. But it just came into my head, and this really changed my whole mindset and whole vision. I just realized I'd never been grateful in 29 years for being able to walk. And then that kind of expanded a bit further. I'd never been grateful, or not been grateful enough, to the people who were now coming helping me meet my basic needs. And then even further, I've grown up in the UK. Free healthcare, free education, freedom to set up a business. So much opportunity. Had I been grateful for that? Not enough. So I then took that as a sign I needed to take ownership of my recovery, start to attack this disease as much as it was attacking me, be proactive in my own health outcomes and start to move forward in my recovery. So I went through walking rehab and intensive physio. I had to have that mindset. It was incredibly painful. I was making progress and then I would go back. I'd have bad days. I anchored into the fact that my daughter had just been born and she'd be walking soon as a real power of why to justify keep going when it was difficult. I also decided that I wasn't going to do what I felt because I didn't feel great most of the time, and that would have led to me not taking action and then feeling like I wasn't meeting my identity of getting back on my feet, and that would cycle me in a negative cycle. So I decided I'm going to act based on who I want to become. I want to be back on my feet, playing with my children, walking with my daughter, showing them that you can come back from challenges. Every morning when I was struggling, I catalysed that and used that as my action. My actions were off who I wanted to become, not how I felt. And because I did that, I then feel good because I wasn't lying to my subconscious saying I was going to get back and not taking the actions needed. So all of a sudden it becomes fuel and you can start to push on. And everything that I did was with the intention of performing and getting back on my feet again and recovering. And those small incremental gains got me back on my feet. After 11 months, I walked a mile unaided, stood there, and felt like I could take on the world in so many ways. And through that process, I started to realize it was my mindset that made the difference. It built my resilience. Having a why is incredibly powerful. It gives you motive to continue intrinsically when it's difficult, and to have that goal to push towards is really pivotal. But it's the small changes that gave me the momentum to recover. And then I utilized that same principle. I was on medication which dampened my immune system, so it didn't attack my connective tissue, which is fine if you want to take medication that they use to kill cells, because that's the medication that I was on. It was cytotoxic. It killed off numerous white blood cells, so I didn't attack myself. And I didn't want that, because my longevity, my health span is going to be impacted by taking medication that kills you. So much so that the pharmacists had to put gloves on to dole it out to give it to you. Tells you all you need to know. So that led to me spending years utilizing my own knowledge of nutrition, of sleep and movement, and realizing there is no one diet plan that works for you, apart from the one that you've experimented to find exactly that it does, because we're all completely bio-individual specimens. We all have our own genetics and epigenetic expression. We all have our own individual microbiome. We all have our own individual gut enzyme makeup. We are not the same as anybody else. Our DNA is 99.3% the same as every other human, and yet we're all different. All different. So very different that you need to experiment with yourself. You are an experiment of one. So I started taking stuff in and out of my diet, ingredient by ingredient, isolating, putting it back in, introducing again, putting it back out. 3 years of journals. How did I feel at the time? How did I feel 30 minutes later? How did I feel 2 hours later? What that did is it gave me a very deep understanding of what foods energized me, what foods I could tolerate, what foods drained me, and what foods set off my inflammation. But more so, that tracking and that focus and alignment started to bleed into areas of my life where my body's feedback, I could hear it. So I could actually do things and see and feel that feedback, how it worked, that acuity. Started to realize the body is an amazing feedback loop. It tells you if it's happy or not happy. And that is a really good way to align what works for you. So I started to optimize my sleep, looking at our circadian rhythms. You know yourself that when you were working at the radio and you weren't honoring your circadian rhythms, all of a sudden that changes your behavioral patterns. Your hormonal regulation is affected. Your emotional regulation is affected, and suddenly you head off to make different behavioral choices, different foods, different movement, different focus, because it's those biorhythms that they run our cells, they run us, they run our energy. And it's really important that we define those and try to be a good human and live on our rhythms, because they're designed for us. Again, people who live on the rhythms find themselves able to perform better because that's how we were designed. And some people are much stronger in the evenings because they have a later rhythm. Some people are really, really good in the mornings. And yet society just has one defined time for everyone to attempt to perform. Well, what about the person who's not in the middle, who performs better later, performs better earlier? The reason why we're wired like that is to ensure that as a species, we are unconscious when we're asleep, which for predators is absolutely delicious, because as soon as they sunk our teeth into us, well, game over. We've not reacted. So we've actually evolved to have people who are really alert late into the night. And to counter that, people who were really alert very early in the morning. So we had a much shorter gap of being prey, which is why we're still here today.
That's interesting. So Lee, how would I know what my bio? How could I track my biorhythms to figure out am I better in the morning, middle of the day, or at night?
So what's interesting is if you ask most people, they tend to get quite, they tend to already know partially. The best way to actually start working it out from a simple perspective without going having DNA tests or any of the more complex things is you have a socially defined wake up time already. Either it be the kids get you up, you go to school, you go to work, you have something that you can anchor into in the morning. So it's starting to actually pull your bedtime back and see what effect that has on your wake up time without an alarm. And by doing that, you actually start to be able to see, are you still getting up at the same time in the morning if you're pulling your sleep back? As you pull it back, you should start to get up earlier. If you don't, then you start to see where your rhythm is stretching, and you can start to experiment it in that direction. That's a really simple and crude way that people can do it without any sleep tracking, without any of the more complex technologies. And there's 73 different genetic expressions you can see that'll give you a good idea of when your actual biorhythm is. And that can be done through the relatively cheap nowadays DNA tests. But at the same time, it's really powerful for us to start looking at that ourselves. And as human beings, we're designed to sleep twice. We're polyphasic. But the Industrial Revolution said goodbye to that. So now we try and get all our sleep in one bout. And in so many ways, we go through our sleep cycles, and sleep is absolutely vital to health and performance. You find the elite athletes, they sleep 11 to 12 hours a day. Cheaters are the ultimate expression of speed and power. They sleep for 18 hours a day. That's how they run at 70 miles an hour. And again, we seem to think that, by staying up later, we'll be able to do more. Well, it has such an effect on our cognitive processing, on our attention, or on our emotional regulation, that the less you sleep, the less effective you are. You can't make it up by the time, because it's real diminishing returns. Whereas actually getting fully restorative sleep puts us in a state where we're actually recovered to do our best work.
Yeah. I wonder if that's the reason. So several years ago, and I started getting back into meditation, but I'd forgotten how. And so, being a technologist, I went, all right, what can I do to figure out how to meditate to get that peaceful, restful mind again? And I found this product called Muse, and it really helped. And so, what I would do at lunchtime, I would eat I would eat a quick lunch, but then I would put Muse on to help me refocus my brain, to get rid of everything. Funny enough, I'm still using technology, but to help me meditate, to try to get to my point, or get to a point to where I could think of nothing and really relax my brain. And then the energy I had after about an hour and a half later was tremendous. It felt like as if I had just woken up all over again, just with about 10 to 15 minutes worth of trying to not think about anything.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, because what it is it's effectively utilizing our body's active rest systems. So by meditating and switching off and disconnecting, it allows some of our neurological processes to start cleaning up our mind effectively, start cleaning out the byproducts of processing. and it can't confer the full benefits of sleep. There are some things that only sleep can do. And yet by having that disconnected period where we actively rest, suddenly we're not being bombarded by stimulus and inputs. Our brain goes to work and starts to clean up, almost like a Zamboni across the ice rink, cleaning all the little nicks from all the performances of the day. And, 10 to 15 minutes meditation, it can give you massive clarity, and it really helps you to connect back again to work with focus and clarity. And really, that's what meditation is. It's anaerobic training for your brain, so that when you start to stretch those boundaries, you've got that capacity. In fact, you've actually got the muscle to push on, to really focus and to really direct your attention in a more intentional way. And in a society where most people, their attention is pulled around like a rag doll from side to side to side, the attention economy is worth billions of pounds. It's their job to hook you from one side to the other, to blow you around like the wind. And being able to actually pull that focus and attention back is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. So again, just meditate. It confers that benefit, but also the American Sleep Society looked at why are people sleeping longer, and they found one of the factors that helped people fall asleep at night was they meditated during the day.
That's absolutely. I mean, I can tell you from my experimentation on myself, which I do quite a bit. I mean, one of the original reasons why I asked you to come on was to talk a little bit about nootropics, which we didn't even get to. But maybe we'll save that for another one. But this is all fascinating because I've been experimenting with myself and these things to see how I react with food, with certain types of supplements, with meditation, with transcranial direct current stimulation devices, which get into the e-gaming things, to even how often I'm in a sauna. It's I think you're absolutely right. We have to be willing to experiment, but don't experiment on everything. Though to me, well, what I mean is everything at once. Unless you're in an extreme event, change one thing at a time and then see what happens. So you've got a book that's coming out in November. What's the name of the book? What inspired you to do this book, and what's it about?
Yeah, so my book is called How to Conquer Anything, and really the focus of the book is looking at my own journey through the challenges that I've had and how I've navigated them in many ways. But really the focus of the book is looking at simple, actionable ways we can start to conquer some of the things that so often hold us back from reaching our potential and going out there and finding and expressing our authentic selves. So we look at the science behind, approaching and conquering fear. We look at the science behind anxiety and low mood. Start to look at some of the things that quite often stop us taking action, such as procrastination, perfectionism. And we look at some other elements, including, how to build that confidence and realizing that actually confidence is just intense trust in yourself. And when you're aligned to that, it's actually there. And really the overarching theory of the book is we can, as human beings, conquer almost anything because all the answers are inside of us. We just need to hone and adapt tools to be able to utilize ourselves more effectively, which at its height is experimenting with ourselves to find what we can do, to find what works for us, to find what doesn't. But the more we experiment, the more data we have to build ourselves into the ultimate performance machine that every single human being can be.
I can't wait for it to come out. I plan on actually getting this for sure. Lee, this has been fabulous. And so, this last portion, the last question I have for you, which is something as a service that I try to have for all of my guests and colleagues, which is to hold all of us mutually accountable for something. So in this case, what I want to know for you, Lee, is what's next? What's your next goal? What's the next thing that myself can help hold you accountable to?
So having just come off medication, that is one big goal that took me, 4 years to achieve. My next big goal is to take Essentialise and start to widen the net in terms of who I impact. So I've spent a good year impacting people in the UK here. The next stage is to message and start to impact those outside of my own area. So in some ways, to expand the international comfort and learning zone for me.
I think that's great. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you coming on, telling us about your story, and really helping me with my journey as to how I'm going to get better in all areas of myself in terms of continuous improvement. And if there's anything I can do for you in the future, Lee, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a privilege.
Absolutely. Everyone, thank you. Take care. All right.